I wanted to spend some time on AWS System Manager because it's likely going to show up on your exam because it's just so wide in its coverage and usage. System Manager is really just an umbrella console for a bunch of different tools that help you manage your landscape. And we're talking about very large landscapes, like tens or hundreds of instances. The main worker component of System Manager is the SSM agent, which is installed on your instances. And it's installed by default on most of the modern AMIs that are provided by AWS since around about 2016. But you can also download it and install it on your on-prem systems and manage those with System Manager as well. And here's what AWS System Manager looks like from the console. Down the left-hand side, you can see all the services that fall under the umbrella of System Manager. There's probably a complete course on System Manager that could be created just on how to use all these various components. But for the purposes of the exam, you don't really need to know too much about how to execute each one of these, but you just need to know how it fits into a greater architectural landscape. So we're going to go through each of the services, and I'm going to give you an idea about what function it provides. And then there's a couple that we're going to dig into a little bit deeper. First up, we have the inventory service, and this really just collects information from your managed instances about various applications and the versions of those applications and various metadata. Let's say that I have a fleet of 200 web servers, and I know that some of those might have an Apache web server version that's being end-of-lifed. So I want to get an idea about which of those have that old version so I can do something with those. So the inventory service would be very useful in helping me determine which of those 200 instances has an older version of Apache, for example. State Manager is used in relation to some other services here, but really all it does is it allows me to specify certain groups of machines that have one configuration or another. Now, for example, I can create a state for my web servers that says any server that has an old version of Apache, I want you to be in a pre-upgrade state. And anything that has a current version, I want you to be in a post-upgrade state. And so then I have these two groups of servers that I can more easily manage, and then I can focus my attention on that pre-upgrade state. Now, System Manager also has some logging components in it, but recently AWS has recommended that we just use the CloudWatch log agent. And that's very useful because then I can stream logs directly to CloudWatch, and I can impart all the great CloudWatch features like monitoring and notification. And so this is a way that I could ship my logs off my instances to a centralized location in CloudWatch, and that can be very useful. We also have Parameter Store, and Parameter Store also integrates into Secrets Manager, if you remember from our security discussions. And Parameter Store is just a good way to store certain config data, connection strings, that sort of thing, so that you can reference it when you're either booting up or upgrading instances. And an example of this might be, maybe I have RDS credentials that I want to append to a config file upon boot. We also have the Insights dashboard, and this is really just an account level view of various CloudTrail, config, and Trust Advisor screens. We also have resource groups, and this is just another way to get to the resource group screen that you can get to from the main console. And resource groups really are just a way to organize your resources through tagging. So I can create a dashboard for all the assets that maybe belong to our production ERP landscape. And so for those who are focused on managing that landscape, they don't have to sift through all these other systems that we may have. They can just focus on one set of assets. We also have maintenance windows, and this allows us to define a schedule or a time frame where these other services can make use of. For example, we can define the hours of midnight to 2 a.m. as a maintenance window, and we can assign that maintenance window to our patch activity within Patch Manager so that our patches are applied during that time. We also have automation, and automation is very useful if you need to do routine maintenance tasks or scripts. An example of this might be our dev and QA instances can be shut down over the weekend because we have nobody working. So we can schedule the dev and QA instances to shut down Friday evening and then come back up Monday morning before anybody comes into work. Then we have run commands, and run commands really just allow us to execute a script or a command line or a PowerShell command, for example, without having to SSH or RDP into that instance. And so if you have to copy a file or do some sort of administrative command on 53 different machines, it would be very much of a hassle to have to RDP into each one of those. So we can use the run command to execute the same command across many different machines. And then we have Patch Manager, and Patch Manager just automates the application of certain patches. And the use case here is we wanted to keep a fleet at the same patch level, and we only want to apply those patches during a maintenance window. Patch Manager uses something called baselines to manage which patches are auto-approved for being applied. And AWS provides predefined baselines for various supported OSs, but you can also create your own custom baseline. Now, in this example here, we're using a predefined baseline that's been created by AWS specifically for Windows servers, and it's called AWS Default Patch Baseline. And there are other predefined baselines for Ubuntu, CentOS, Amazon Linux, and the like. And the purpose of this baseline is it kind of acts like a set of rules or a gatekeeper, and it will allow certain patches to come through and be automatically applied if they meet certain criteria. Now, in this default patch baseline for Windows that AWS provides, they have this 7-day timer. Normally, in a production environment, we don't necessarily want to patch something on exactly the day that it gets released. Maybe we want to wait a little bit in case there's some problems, or maybe we want to apply that in a canary scenario so that we can test it a little bit more. So it's probably a good thing that we don't just automatically have these things applied on the day they're dropped. But if we do want to apply things on the day that they drop, we can create a different baseline, a custom baseline, and apply that to our servers. So in this case, we have certain critical updates that get automatically applied, but there are other updates that maybe are optional in nature, and we don't necessarily want those applied because maybe we need to review them closer. Now, there's another component to System Manager that sometimes is a bit confusing, so I wanted to talk about it here. There's this concept of documents, and System Manager documents, or SSM documents, define the actions that System Manager performs. And they're just JSON or YAML files, and they include different steps and parameters that you specify. And they're stored as versions, and you can also share these SSM documents across other accounts or publicly. The first type of document is called a command document, and it's used with the run command or the state manager. And it does kind of what you would expect. It holds different commands to either execute on a system or apply certain configuration. We also have the policy document that's used with State Manager and allows us to define the certain conditions or configurations that would put that instance in a given state or another. As an example, if we go back to our Apache HTTP version, we could define a policy document that says if this instance has this older version of Apache, then it lives in this state, or it assumes this state. And we also have the automation document, and this is used with the automation service. And it's just a list of tasks or commands that get applied when we're using the automation service.